Hi everyone. I wanted to go over something that I was talking to a student about, making a, a furry looking texture and trying to draw that so it looks realistic. And it's not quite as intuitive as somebody might think. If you were thinking about hair, I guess you would think about it in terms of individual strands. But that doesn't really work when we only have one value, or we only have one color. So we've got lots of values to work with, but we don't have color to work with. So I can't necessarily draw hairs this way because the darker value will kind of imply shadow or a darker color. So I wish I had the photograph. This is a really grainy photocopy, so I don't even want to really work off of this too much because it doesn't give you a very good indication of what I'm looking at. But it's this kind of furry looking blanket, and I'm trying to look at it in terms of texture, trying to draw in some of the shadow shapes. There are a couple of things that might be helpful to look at, but for the most part, I'm going to look at another photograph off camera. So you're not necessarily going to be able to see what I'm looking at, but I'm going to try and explain it in a way that makes sense. So instead of thinking about hair like this, want to think about it more in terms of its mass. So hair, fur, I'll probably refer to it interchangeably. We've got this blanket, and part of it is kind of swooping down and through here, got a little bit through here. I've got a really dark area that is going to be more in shadow and through here, and then it comes back down. Let's see. Can't move it around. All right, so this is what I've got. And a couple little folds. Let's see, I can probably draw in a little bit of the outline of that shape there. Comes down, up a little bit higher, down and through there. Okay. So this is the general shape of this one section. I'm gonna draw out an edge for my border. All right, so what I'm gonna do now is group some of these different values. So I already kind of shaded in this one section. This is a crease, and I'm going to start with this. I've got a 4B pencil right now just to lay down some value. And I've got another little fold there. Okay, so now it's going to be breaking up these areas in terms of value and shape. So this whole section in through here has got kind of a basic shadow value. And I'm going to start to lay down that. It doesn't matter too much if it's streaky right now. I'll come back around to that, but I wanted to start with some larger, more posterized shadow shapes. And then this part comes down and through here. I've got a little section. And what I'm doing as I draw this out is I'm kind of squinting, looking at the photograph. So I don't want to think about this, well, let's see. I want to think about it more in terms of some of these value shapes than anything else. And it's going to look a little bit like a paint by number kind of picture at the beginning. Okay, this. How I deal with edges will be important as I move forward, but I'm not going to get to that quite yet. You know, we talked about doing textured shading and cross-hatching in our second project. I end up using that a lot to even just start a drawing, laying in value. I'm going to maybe go to one of my softer pencils, maybe a 6B. Start working out some of this value. I might even give it a little bit more of an irregular edge. On both sides of it, little, I wouldn't say crunchy, but it's definitely like a jagged kind of edge. A little bit tighter in on this side. And you know I said that don't draw outlines, they don't exist. In real life, in nature, it's a two-dimensional construct. And there are going to be times that it seems like I'm drawing an outline or a line. That's really just a very tight cast shadow or shadow shape. All right. And I'm going through and I'm drawing on the tip of my pencil just a little bit more in through here. If I draw too much on the side, it'll pick up too much of the tooth of the paper and it will look really grainy. So if I draw with the point of my pencil, I'm getting down into the crevices of the tooth of the paper, the kind of the valley of the paper. And I just realized that I was resting my hand on the edge of the paper, or the face of the paper, but I don't want to do that because otherwise I will get it all smudgy. All right, so darkening this down and through here, going a couple of different directions, because that will even out those pencil strokes, make them less noticeable. Around and through here, make that a little bit darker. Darker in through here, kind of lose the actual structure as I move through here. This is probably going to end up being less of a cast shadow and more of a form shadow as it moves up into the space, this kind of roll of the blanket up and through here. So I've got that edge. This is probably going to be pretty light in through here, and then this is going to be more in shadow. So now I'm still just laying down some larger shadow shapes. You should have a value scale right next to you when you do this. I don't have a value scale right next to me. No, I take that back. I take that back. I do have a value scale, something I had done earlier. So I'm gonna keep this just off camera again. Well, maybe I'll set it right there. Turn it upside down. Now I've got my value scale. Be able to see that a little bit more easily. So this whole section in through here is probably going to be quite a bit darker. So I guess I'll go into it with my 6B. And I'm going a different direction than I started so that, again, those pencil strokes start to disappear. And I have not even gotten around to the actual texture yet because I'm still just laying in value. And edge resolution is one of the things that's going to help with indicating the actual texture. Okay, this whole section is darker by at least a shade than this. It's a slightly irregular edge in through here. So I'll still keep that kind of jagged. The nap of the blanket of that fur is kind of going at a diagonal. So I might start using just a little bit of the direction of my pencil to help indicate that. It's not going to be the only thing by any means that helps, but it will help. And that was one of the reasons that I start you guys out with doing that textured shading drawing, is because some of those techniques end up coming in handy as we go through and do different types of things. So I've got a dark shadow shape in here, and that rolls up into kind of furry area in here, which is a little bit darker. This little section in here is a little bit darker. I think this section in through here is going to have the most texture, where I see the nap or the direction of that fur. It's like, I'm sure there's a better term for it. All I can think of right now is fur. It looks a lot like, yeah, like a furry blanket. And so you might actually, you know, I'm thinking about this, you might be tempted to really just scribble through here, and that will probably have a pretty good effect, but I think that you can do this just a little bit more intentionally anyway. Let's see, this is a light edge, so I'm gonna make sure that this is nice and sharp. You know, I talked about edge resolution and contrast, and how sometimes you'll have a really hard edge and a strong contrast in value. So you've got, you know, two types of contrast. And then sometimes it's going to be a lot softer. It's going to be maybe a hard edge with a lower contrast. Sometimes you'll have a soft edge and a soft contrast, which is probably around and through the body of this. And actually, before I get too far, I'm going to go over all of this with my, I was going to do 2B, but I think I'm going to go to B. I'm going to go all through here with my B pencil. And most of the time I have to cover the whole surface in order to have things read correctly. And if we're thinking about the whole value range, again, we've got the darkest value. It's like shadow creases kind of in through here. Lightest values, highlights. I don't know if I'm going to have that in here or not. I might have it a little bit. Oh, I'm going to go back through here. This probably should have been a little bit darker, but I'll start laying that in. I think this section is going to be a little bit lighter, so I might not go a whole lot darker with that anyway. I think this section is a little bit darker. This little section right in through here is a bit lighter. And of course, if you haven't already been paying attention, that your harder pencils will be streakier and your softer pencils will be smudgier, kind of grainy looking. I have here H. This is probably a little bit too hard. I don't want to go too dark with this area though. And I am using a little bit more of the side of the pencil here. You know, because it's a harder pencil, it doesn't pick up the texture, the tooth of the paper quite as easily as the soft pencils do. All right, so right now it still looks kind of like blobby and not super distinctive. This is the section that I think I really want to focus on up here. So let's see, I'm gonna go back to, I don't know if I want to use my 6B, 4B. Okay, so actually I'm gonna do two things. One of them is go through with my kneaded eraser and start to kind of erase out or pull out some larger forms. And I say larger, and they're actually a little bit smaller in relation to the whole image. There are all these like little kind of triangular tufts of hair, fur. And they overlap each other. And the thing about these is you will see details. You're not going to see the same thing over and over and over again. It's not going to be like a pattern. I'm trying to work through this kind of quickly. You know, my heart wants to spend a lot of time on each one of these individually, but that is not that helpful for you. And sometimes I can actually work through with some of the kind of the scribbly marks that I've already created to create that same kind of effect, which is a nice happy accident. You know, I'm still seeing all the same kinds of things in through these kind of halftone sections, but the contrast isn't as high. Sometimes it can feel like you're drawing a million blades of grass. But I'm kind of just drawing in like maybe the shadow side of each one of these. I'm not going to focus too much on everything because like there's a lot of area to cover here, and I'm really trying to look more at an effect than to get all of the kind of exact detail. Maybe go back through here, continue to bring this down in value, and getting the right texture or edge, that jagged edge in through here, is also going to do a lot to describe the surface of this blanket. Now, if I was to make this really smooth and soft, then it would be more confusing. But if I make this edge a lot more jagged, then you start to be able to read into the texture and the rest of it. Okay, and same thing back up here. A lot more of a jagged edge. Let's see, I'm gonna go to my HB. putting in a couple like more irregular details. Like there's a little split in between some of these little tufts of fur. So, you know, the rest of it might be regularly irregular. Okay, let me see. Let me back to my 4B. Got a section in through here where I'm almost looking like straight at some of these little tufts. They almost create like little zigzags. Okay, so that's starting to look a little bit more furry. That's good. This section down and through here still needs a little bit of work. Let's see. It is a lot more smoothed out, so I'm going to really try and even this out a little bit more. Start to get that initial pencil stroke smoothed out just a little bit more, where like that kind of scruffy texture really worked well up here. It's like I want it to not be quite as noticeable in this area. And even in this area where it's a little bit more in shadow, I'll go back to my maybe 2B. And even though I had kind of blocked out and posterized these shadow shapes, most of them probably should be a little bit smoothed out in their edges. They have a softer edge resolution. And, you know, sometimes I have to go back and actually like erase out one of the lines that I did to mark those out because it's too strong and it starts to get distracting. You see a couple little tufts of hair. Things that create shapes. In a way, it's kind of like when you look up at a cloud and you see different shapes in it. It's kind of a similar thing. But I don't want to get carried away in the shapes that I see so much that it becomes distracting. There is a balance there. And just like when we were going over the textured shading, you know you can layer and build up your surface. You know, it generally works better to have a softer pencil or a harder pencil over top of a softer pencil, but you know, sometimes it still does work with you know, within a few degrees of each pencil. You know, usually you don't want to really develop an area with an H pencil and then try and go over it with a 6B pencil. It doesn't stick quite as easily. I think there's too much clay in the hard pencil, not quite enough graphite. I'm looking for some kind of specific forms and shapes that I can hone in on. I mentioned that with at least a few of you in your last drawing to start to include more details, because it adds to the complexity of the image and adds to the visual interest of the image overall. Now, there are times that drawing something kind of minimalistically is actually harder than drawing in a lot of details, because you really have to be careful about indicating surface and developing structure that way. But I think for the most part, we're going to find that more details equals more complexity, equals a higher grade. So in the areas of the light mass where there's still this change in structure, these little details, I have to be careful not to go too dark with those. Because if I make these just as dark as that crease there, then they look like they're on the same plane. Then this starts to look like a hole instead of just a surface effect on top. So that's where, you know, I've got a low contrast in value, but I might still have to have a pretty high contrast in the edge. 2B might be too soft. Let me see. You know, I could do a lot more. I don't want to bore you. If I make this video too big, too long, it'll take forever to upload. But, you know, I hope this encourages you to think about shapes, especially texture of fabric or fur, to be thinking about it a little bit more in terms of grouping some of these forms together, looking for the shapes in the surface rather than just focusing in on the surface itself and trying to imitate the surface, because with graphite that's not really very easy to do anyway. You know, you could probably do it with paint a little bit more easily, but even then it starts to look a little tacky, a little awkward. Let's see, in this area and through here it's a little bit more horizontal. Maybe I should just use my pencil stroke to indicate that horizontal a little bit more angle. This is kind of a shadow shape, a little bit. Sometimes it's easy to get lost in between some of these shapes and surfaces. But, you know, I spent, what, 20 minutes or so? Could probably go darker with this. Could probably kind of come in through here. Oh, I don't know if I showed this. I can't remember if I showed this on the last video. Like, sometimes I will use a tissue. Make sure it's not a tissue with lotion in it. That you can do this and start to pull together a surface. You want to make sure that this is nice and flat, and I can tell that it's not super flat. Now this won't help a drawing that's really streaky, but it will start to fill in those spaces of the tooth of the paper. Like that already looks a little bit more, say, dimensional through that shadow shape there. Then I can go back in with my 6B, really darken that up a little bit more. I don't have it right with me, but I would probably usually have my pencil sharpener right next to me so that I could keep that edge, that point nice and sharp to really get into the tooth of the paper and create really, really dark, rich surfaces. Because, you know, it gets worn down so fast because it's really soft. A little bit more texture through there. And so where this does kind of blend up a little bit into this shadow space, this side should be pretty sharp in that edge. And oh, I didn't use this one yet. Sometimes this one, this pencil eraser, can be a little bit better at maintaining that edge. All right, I know there's so much more that I could do, but maybe that helps to get an idea about grouping areas of value, some of these more subtle kind of little tufts of hair, the shadows, maybe even making some of your lines a little bit more directional, help to imitate that, and really start to get that feeling of the texture of a surface.